The splintered wood of the gallows bit into Abigail Hayes's cheek. She heard the crowd before she saw them, a hungry, growling mob gathered in the Red Exemption Bluff town square. The thick hemp rope already smelled of dust and finality. She'd been found guilty the gavel had fallen, and her life was measured in the few remaining grains of sand in the hourglass. The sheriff cleared his throat, his words lost to the ringing in her ears. This was it. But just as the shadow of the noose fell across her face, a single sharp rifle crack echoed from the bluffs. The executioner froze. A rider moving like thunder parted the crowd. He wasn't a savior. He was a phantom, and he held a piece of paper that would stop her death, but condemn her to something far more mysterious. The sun was a merciless white eye over the Wyoming territory, baking the dust of Redemption Bluff into a fine, choking powder. For Abigail Hayes, the heat was a distant sensation, a final insult from a world that had already convicted her. She stood on the raw pine of the gallows, her wrists bound so tightly, the rope fibers felt embedded in her skin. Below her, the town watched. Their faces were a blur of righteous anger and morbid curiosity. She saw Mrs. Gable, the boarding house owner, who had testified that Abigail was unnatural, too quiet. She saw Jedediah Smith, the blacksmith, who had spit at her feet when the sheriff led her past. They had all known her for 6 months, and in 6 days they had all agreed she was a murderer. Sheriff Brody, a man whose face looked carved from worn leather, unrolled a scroll. His voice was heavy, reluctant, but clear. Abigail Hayes, having been tried by a jury of your peers and found guilty of the murder of Mr. Elias Thorne, you are hereby sentenced to be hanged by the neck until dead. May God have mercy on your soul. Abigail's throat was too dry to speak, too constricted to beg. She hadn't killed Elias. He had been her benefactor, the only man who'd given her work as a bookkeeper at his ranch when she arrived with nothing but a battered valise and a past she never spoke of. She'd found him. That was her crime. She'd found him slumped over his desk, a peacemaker revolver, still warm in his hand, a bullet hole in his temple. But Deputy Finch, arriving moments later, had found her fingerprints on the gun. Her handkerchief used to wipe a small smear of ink from the desk was now a bloody rag. And Bartholomew Bart, Sloane Thorne's partner, had provided the motive. She was stealing from him. Sloane had boomed in the courtroom, his diamond stickpin flashing. Elias caught her, and she silenced him. A tragic, venomous act. It was all lies. But Sloane was the richest man in the county. He owned the bank, the saloon, and it seemed the truth. Abigail closed her eyes. She thought of the high green valleys of her home in the east, a place she could never return to. She thought of Elias Thorne's kindness, his quiet voice, reading poetry in the evenings. A single tear cut a clean path through the grime on her cheek. The executioner, a paunchy man named Peters, stepped forward. He smelled of whiskey and sweat. He pulled the thick hood over her head, plunging her into a stifling black void. She heard the heavy clunk as he tested the trapdoor mechanism. Her stomach revolted. Any final words? Brody asked, his voice softer now. Abigail shook her head in the darkness. She heard the crowd shuffle. A woman yelled, "Get on with it! Send her to hell!" She heard the executioner's heavy boot step toward the lever. She braced herself, her entire being focused on the horrifying drop she knew was coming. Crack. The sound wasn't the trapdoor. It was a rifle shot, sharp and definitive, echoing from the high bluffs overlooking the town. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Voices yelled in confusion. "Hold, Sheriff!" Brody shouted. Abigail trembled, trapped in the dark. What fresh hell was this? A rescue! An assassination rider coming, a man shouted. She heard the powerful, frantic gallop of a single horse cutting through the murmuring crowd. The sound stopped directly below the scaffold. Sheriff Brodie. The voice was deep resonant and coated in cold authority. It was a voice that did not ask, it commanded. You will stay this execution. On whose authority Brodie demanded. On the authority of Territorial Governor John Hoyt, and on mine, the man snapped. Abigail felt the hood ripped from her head. She blinked, her eyes watering in the sudden, blinding light. She looked down. He was magnificent and terrible, mounted on a jet-black stallion that steamed in the heat. The man himself was dressed in a fine, tailored black coat, immaculate, despite the dust. His face was sharp, angular, with eyes the color of a winter sky. He looked like a predator in a preacher's suit. He was Silas Vane. Vane was a ghost story in Redemption Bluff. He owned the Vane's Overlook, a sprawling, fortified ranch deep in the canyons, a place locals avoided. He was rumored to be impossibly wealthy, impossibly ruthless, and he hadn't been seen in town for over 2 years. He held up a paper sealed with the governor's wax. This is a writ of reprieve pending new evidence. The conviction is suspect. Sheriff Brodie stared, dumbfounded. Mr. Vane, I have a lawful order of execution, and I have a superior one, Vane said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. Now cut her down. Or I will. Bart Sloane shoved his way through the crowd, his face purple with rage. This is an outrage. Vane, you have no business here. This woman is a killer. Silas Vane didn't even look at him. His icy gaze was locked on the executioner, who was frozen by the lever. Vane calmly unholstered his revolver, a nickel-plated Colt with an ivory grip, and aimed it at the man's chest. Sheriff Vane said softly, You have 5 seconds. Brodie, seeing the unblinking certainty in Vane's eyes, cursed under his breath. Peters, stand down. Cut her loose. The executioner, sweating profusely, fumbled with his knife and sawed through the ropes on her wrists. The moment her hands were free, Abigail's knees buckled. She swayed, the blood rushing back in a wave of agony. Before she could fall, before anyone could move, Silas Vane spurred his horse forward, urging it right beside the platform. He didn't dismount. He leaned down, his powerful arm encircling her waist like a steel band, and hauled her bodily from the gallows. He seated her in front of him on the saddle, her back pressed hard against his chest. The entire event had taken less than 30 seconds. This ain't lawful. Vane Sloane roared his hand, moving toward his own hip. Vane's revolver was instantly trained on Sloane's forehead. Try it, Bart. Give me the reason I've been waiting for. Sloane froze his hand, hovering. My business is my own, Vane said to the stunned crowd. She is under my protection. Anyone who interferes will answer to me. He spun the black stallion around the horse, rearing slightly. Abigail clung to the saddle horn, her head swimming. She looked back at the gallows, the empty noose swinging gently in the breeze. She had been dead. Now she was... What Silas Vane spurred the horse into a hard gallop, leaving the stunned, silent crowd and the swinging rope behind in the dust. He did not speak a word to her. He just rode his arm locked around her, pinning her to him as they fled toward the high, unknown canyons. The ride to Vane's Overlook was a brutal, jarring blur. Silas Vane rode with a reckless speed, not for her comfort, but for his own purpose. He navigated the switchbacks and dry riverbeds with an animal's instinct, his body rigid against hers. Abigail was weak, her arms and legs shaking from the interrupted trauma. The only sound was the rhythmic thunder of hooves, the creak of leather, and Vane's steady, controlled breathing. She was acutely aware of the man holding her. He was a wall of muscle and fine wool, and he smelled of tobacco leather and something metallic like an old coin. He had not offered her a word of comfort, not even an explanation. She was cargo retrieved and transported. After nearly 2 hours, they crested a high ridge, and she saw it. Vane's Overlook was not a ranch. It was a fortress. It was built into the cliffside, a sprawling, 2-story main house made of thick, dark timber and river stone. It was surrounded by a high stone wall, and the main gate was flanked by 2 armed guards who nodded respectfully as Vane rode through. The place was isolated, severe, and beautiful in a desolate, unwelcoming way. He finally reined the stallion to a halt in a courtyard, dismounted in one fluid motion, and then, with the same impersonal strength as before, lifted her down. Her legs gave way, and for a moment she had to grip his forearm to keep from collapsing. His arm was like iron. "You can stand," he stated. It wasn't a question. Abigail forced her legs to lock, pushing away from him. She met his gaze. His eyes were even colder up close, dissecting her, calculating. Why she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Later. He motioned to a stoic-looking woman in a severe grey dress who had emerged from the main house. "Matilda. See to her. Room in the east wing. She's not to leave the house." "Yes, Mr. Vane, the woman," Matilda said, her face impassive. Matilda took Abigail's arm. Her grip was firm, guiding her up the steps and into the house. The interior was dark, opulent, and suffocating. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn against the sun. The furniture was dark mahogany, and the air was still. She was led to a room that was larger than any she had ever stayed in. It had a 4-poster bed, a fireplace, and a private washroom with a copper tub. A clean, simple dress was already laid out on the bed. "You will wash. You will eat. You will not be disturbed," Matilda said, her voice flat. She left, and Abigail heard the unmistakable click of a key turning in the lock. She was no longer on the gallows, but she was still a prisoner. She bathed the hot water, stinging her raw skin, washing away the grime of the jail. She looked at the red raw rope burns on her wrists. She was alive. The sheer, terrifying relief of it was so overwhelming she had to sit on the floor, her head between her knees, just to breathe. She was saved by a man who looked at her as if she were a new piece of livestock. Later, Matilda returned with a tray of food, thick beef stew bread and water. Abigail ate the food, tasting like ash in her mouth, but she knew she needed strength. That evening the door opened again. It was Silas Vane. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the lamplight of the hall. He studied her for a long moment. She was sitting in the chair by the window, the clean dress hanging loosely on her frame. "You are Abigail Hayes, born in Philadelphia. Parents deceased. You worked as a governess in Laramie before being dismissed. You arrived in Redemption Bluff 6 months ago. You have no family, no connections, and no money." It wasn't a question. It was an inventory. "You left out that I'm a convicted murderer," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "The court says you are," he replied, stepping into the room. He tossed a small, heavy object onto the bed. It landed with a soft thud on the quilt. Abigail looked at it. It was a pendant, a heavy piece of silver intricately carved into the shape of a hunting owl with its wings partially spread. It hung from a simple leather cord. "What is this?" "Put it on." "Do not take it off," he commanded. "My men patrol this ranch. They are paid to be suspicious. They will not harm anyone wearing that. They will stop anyone who is not." She picked it up. The silver was warm. "You lock me in and you give me this. Is it a key or a collar?" A flicker of something amusement perhaps passed through his cold eyes. "It is a shield. As long as you are on my land, it will keep you safer than your innocence did in town." She looped the cord around her neck. The silver owl felt impos facts like a brand against her collarbone. Now she said, her newfound strength warring with her fear. "You will tell me why. Why did you stop the hanging?" Vane walked to the window, pushing aside the heavy curtain to look out at the dark canyon. You knew Elias Thorne. He was my friend. He was a good man. I didn't kill him. I don't care if you did or not. Vane said, turning back to her. His bluntness was a slap. Your guilt or innocence is a matter of profound indifference to me. Your life, however, is not. I don't understand. Elias Thorne was a man I owed. A debt. A very old one. He saved something that belonged to me long ago. I was not in a position to repay him in kind. Until today. He saved something of yours. He saved my life, Vane said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He was a different man then. A doctor, back east. I was in trouble. He patched me up, hid me. I swore I'd repay the debt. I never got the chance. When I heard he was dead, I assumed the debt was nullified. But when I heard his accused killer was to be hanged, I saw a final transaction. Abigail's blood ran cold. A transaction. He saved my life. I saved yours. The debt is paid. As far as I'm concerned, Elias Thorne and I are now square. She stared at him, horrified. This wasn't mercy. This wasn't justice. It was bookkeeping. He had saved her not for her, but as a line item in a ledger of his own. So what happens now? She asked. Am I your prisoner? Your servant, you are a complication, Vane said. He walked to the door. You will stay here. You will be fed. You will be clothed. Bart Sloane is not a man who forgets. He wanted you dead. He will not be happy you are alive. As long as you are here, he cannot touch you. That is the only protection I can offer. And when can I leave? When I am certain your presence no longer endangers my ranch, or when Sloane is no longer a threat. He paused his hand on the doorknob, whichever comes first. And what if I try to leave before that Silas Vane looked back at her, and this time there was no mistaking the ice in his gaze? The gallows would have been quicker. My men are not executioners, Miss Hayes, but they are not merciful either. Wear the pendant. Stay in the house. The door closed. The lock clicked. Abigail was left alone in the opulent, silent room. She clutched the silver owl at her throat. It was heavy like a stone. She had been saved from the hangman's rope, only to be collared by a ghost. She was alive, but she was not free. The town of Redemption Bluff was reeling. The gallows built at great expense to the county stood empty, a monument to an interrupted spectacle. In the Golden Nugget saloon, the whiskey flowed as fast as the rumors. He just took her, exclaimed Jedediah Smith, the blacksmith slamming his mug on the bar. Rode in like Napoleon and just snatched her right off the platform. It ain't right. It was Vane, another man whispered, as if saying the name too loudly would summon him. Heard he had a pardon from the governor himself. Pardon, ha, scoffed a third. Vane is the governor in those canyons. He's got more guns than the U.S. Army. What I want to know is why her Vane ain't been to town in 2 years. Why does he care about Thorne's killer? At a corner table, Sheriff Brodie nursed a cup of black coffee, his head in his hands. Deputy Finch, a weaselly man with nervous, shifting eyes, sat opposite him. Sheriff, you just let him go, Finch said, polishing his badge on his sleeve. Brodie looked up, his eyes bloodshot. What was I supposed to do, Finch? Start a war? Vane had that pardon. It looked legal. And even if it wasn't, he had his gun on Peters. You saw his eyes. He'd have pulled the trigger. I saved a man's life. But she's guilty, Finch insisted. We found the gun, her prints, Sloane's testimony. It was too clean, Brodie muttered, swirling the coffee. Elias Thorne was a careful man. He wasn't the type to be caught off guard by a bookkeeper. And that gun, it was his, but it was on the wrong side of the desk. He was left-handed. The gun was near his right. Finch paled slightly. I didn't notice that, Sheriff. No, you didn't. You were too busy agreeing with Mr. Sloane. Brody stood up, his joints cracking. Vane's interference means this ain't over. I'm going to look at those case files again. Something stinks. And it ain't just Peter's. As Brody left, Finch quickly finished his drink and scurried out the back door. He didn't go to the sheriff's office. He went to the Sloane National Bank, a grand brick building that stood in sharp contrast to the wooden storefronts around it. Bartholomew Sloane was in his office, a fug of cigar smoke hanging around him. He was not a happy man. When Finch entered, Sloane didn't bother to look up from the decanter of brandy he was pouring. He's reopening the case, Finch stammered, wringing his hat. Brody, he's suspicious. He said it was too clean. He mentioned the gun. Sloane stopped pouring. He slowly, deliberately set the decanter down. He mentioned the gun, did he? And what did you say? You incompetent little worm. Nothing, I said nothing, mister. Sloane, I swear. Sloane rounded the desk, his sheer bulk menacing. He grabbed Finch by the lapels and slammed him against the velvet wallpaper. You were paid to do one simple thing. Plant the gun. Make sure her prints were on it. You assured me it was handled. It was Finch, wheezed, his eyes bulging. She found him just like we knew she would. She ran for the main house. I went in, put the gun in her hand, while she was hysterical, then wiped it and dropped it. She was covered in his... Well, you know, it was perfect. It was perfect. Sloane growled, his face inches from Finch's, until Silas Vane rode into my town. My town, and took her. Now, instead of a closed case, I have a meddling sheriff and a ghost on a black horse asking questions. What's Vane's angle? Finch pleaded. I don't know, Sloane said, releasing him. Finch slumped to the floor, gasping. Vane and Thorne had some history, I recall. From back east. It doesn't matter. Vane's interest complicates things. He has her. He might talk to her. She don't know nothing, Mr. Sloane. She's just a dumb bookkeeper. She's not dumb, Sloane said, staring out the window toward the distant canyons. Thorne trusted her. He was teaching her the business. That deputy is why she had to be the one to hang for it. Thorne was getting sentimental. He was getting greedy. Sloane was the one who had killed Elias Thorne. They were partners in a massive land grab scheme. They used Sloane's bank to foreclose on small failing ranches, and Thorne's knowledge of the water rights to divert streams, drying them out. But Thorne had developed a conscience. He'd wanted to back out to confess. Sloane couldn't allow that. What do we do? Finch asked, scrambling to his feet. We let the dust settle. Vane has her locked up tight. She's not a guest, she's a prisoner. He's just paying a debt. He'll keep her there until he's bored of her. In the meantime, you go back to Sheriff Brody. You be his shadow. You find out exactly what he's looking for. And Vane Sloane smiled a cold, thin expression. Vane stays in his fortress. He's safe there. But she won't stay there forever. And when she leaves, she's still a convicted murderer. Vane's pardon is a reprieve, not an exoneration. If she steps 1 foot off his land, she's fair game. And I'll have men watching every road out of that canyon. Sloane picked up his cigar. Vane may have saved her from the rope, but I'll see her buried in a pine box before winter. Days bled into a week. Abigail's life at Vane's Overlook settled into a strange, suffocating routine. She was an invisible entity in a house full of silent servants. Matilda brought her meals. She was allowed to walk in the main house, but the doors to the outside were locked. She was, as she'd surmised, a high-value prisoner. The pendant never left her neck. The silver was a constant cool weight against her skin. The few ranch hands she saw moving in the courtyard, hard, grim-faced men, would sometimes glance at her through the windows. Their eyes would flick to the owl at her throat, and then they would immediately look away, as if she were simultaneously protected and cursed. Silas Vane was a ghost. She would hear his boots on the hardwood floors late at night, or catch a glimpse of him riding his black stallion out to the high pastures at dawn. He never spoke to her. He had saved her life and then discarded her in this gilded cage. Her anger began to outweigh her fear. She was not a pawn. She was not a complication. She was an innocent woman. One rainy afternoon, driven by a desperate need to do something, she began to explore the house. The east wing was hers, but she wandered into the main hall, a vast two-story room dominated by a fireplace big enough to roast an ox, and a library of books that stretched to the ceiling. It was a house built by a man who wanted to keep the world out. In a small study off the main library, a room that was clearly Vane's, she saw something familiar. It was a wooden box inlaid with pearl sitting on a side table. She recognized it instantly. It was Elias Thorne's. It was where he kept his correspondence. Her heart hammered. Vane had said he owed Elias. Had he retrieved his friend's possessions? Her hands trembled as she opened it. It was full of letters, old land deeds and business papers. But near the bottom, tucked under a stack of receipts, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. She opened it. The first half was what she expected: Elias Thorne's meticulous records of ranch expenses, cattle sales, and water rights. She had made many of these entries herself, but the second half was different. The handwriting was still Thorne's, but it was frantic, hurried. It wasn't bookkeeping. It was a diary, and it detailed in damning clarity his partnership with Bartholomew Sloane. She read her horror growing. Elias wrote of the scheme to bankrupt their neighbors. He wrote of his crushing guilt. He wrote of his confrontation with Sloane, his desire to make things right. The last entry, dated the morning of his death, was the most chilling. Sloane will not be moved. He called me a sentimental fool. He said I know too much to walk away. He is coming to the ranch tonight. He says we must settle our accounts. I fear what he means. I am sending the box to Vane. He is the only one who can stand against Sloane. If anything happens to me, Vane will know where to look. I pray he gets this in time. I fear for Abigail. She is too clever. She has been asking about the water discrepancies. I fear Sloane sees her as a loose end. Abigail sank into the chair, the ledger in her lap. Elias hadn't just been murdered. He'd been planning for it. He'd tried to protect her. And he had sent this box to Silas Vane. This changed everything. A new cold fury rose in her. Vane hadn't just saved her to pay a debt. He'd been sent the proof of her innocence. He'd known about Sloane. She waited for him. Night fell. The house was tomb silent. Just after midnight, she heard the front door open and his heavy, confident steps in the hall. She walked out of the study holding the ledger. He stopped, surprised to see her. He was in his shirt sleeves, his coat slung over his shoulder. He looked tired, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "You're supposed to be in your room," he said. "You lied to me," she said, her voice shaking with rage. She held up the ledger. "You knew. You knew Elias sent this to you. You knew he was afraid of Sloane. You knew he was murdered." Vane's expression hardened. He set his coat down. "Where did you get that you didn't save my life to pay a debt? You saved me because this ledger wasn't enough. You needed a witness. You needed the person Sloane framed. You let me go to the gallows, you let them put the rope around my neck, just to pull me out at the last second and make me your pawn." He didn't deny it. He walked past her into the study and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He pushed one toward her. She ignored it. "You're correct," he said, taking a sip. "I received the box the day of your trial. Thorn had one of his most loyal hands ride it out here with instructions not to deliver it until after he was confirmed dead. By the time I read it, you were already convicted. The trial was a farce." "So you sat back and watched," she cried, tears of fury in her eyes. "You let them sentence me to die." "Yes," he said, his voice cutting. "To stop the execution, I needed more than a dead man's journal. I needed a territorial reprieve. That took 2 days to secure from Cheyenne. I had to bribe 2 telegraph operators and promise the governor my support in his water rights dispute with the railroad. I rode for 36 hours straight. I arrived with less than a minute to spare." He leaned on the desk, his eyes boring into hers. "Do not mistake my methods for malice, Miss Hayes. I did what was necessary. Saving you was part of it, yes. But the true goal is destroying Bart Sloan. He and I have unfinished business. So the debt to Elias, that was a lie. No, that was the truth," he said quietly. "But it was not the whole truth. The debt was real. The ledger gave me the weapon. And you, Miss Hayes, you are the bullet." She looked at him, seeing the complex, dangerous man before her. He was not a savior. He was an avenger. "What business?" she asked. "What did Sloan do to you?" Vane picked up the whiskey she had refused and downed it. "That is not your concern. Your concern is staying alive. Sloan knows you're here. He knows I have you. He's waiting. He thinks I'm just hiding you. He doesn't know I have the proof." "So what do we do?" she said. "We give this to Sheriff Brody. Brody is a good man, but he's weak. His deputy Finch is in Sloan's pocket. The ledger would disappear, and we would both be dead before morning. Sloan doesn't just own the bank. He owns the law in that town." "Then we are trapped," Abigail said, slumping. "You've saved me for nothing." "Not for nothing," Vane said. He walked to the window, staring into the blackness. "Sloan is arrogant. He thinks he's won. He thinks you're terrified. He needs to be drawn out of his bank, away from his paid-off deputy. We need to draw him onto my territory. He'll never come here. He knows you're armed." "He won't come for me," Vane said, turning back to her. He looked at her, a new calculating light in his eyes. "But he'll come for you. You want me to be bait. You're already the bait, Miss Hayes. The only question is whether you want to be the bait with the trap or just the bait." Abigail looked down at the silver owl in her hand. It was a mark of protection, but also a target. She finally understood. Vane hadn't just given her a shield, he'd given her a purpose. "What do I have to do?" she asked. For 3 days, a new tension settled over the ranch. Abigail was no longer just a prisoner. She was a conspirator. She and Silas Vane spent hours in the study, poring over the ledger and maps of the territory. He was teaching her, explaining the intricate web of land deeds, water rights, and false foreclosures that Sloan had spun. He was no longer the cold, distant captor. He was a general planning a campaign. He was sharp-focused and possessed a brilliance she found both admirable and terrifying. But he remained guarded, a fortress unto himself. The why of his hatred for Sloan remained a locked room. "Sloan's power is in the bank," Silas explained, tracing a line on a map. "He holds the paper on every ranch from here to Laramie, but his vulnerability is his greed. He thinks he's covered his tracks, but Thorn's ledger is the key." "But we can't use it," Abigail countered, frustrated. "It's your word against his, and he has the whole town, which is why we don't use it as evidence. We use it as leverage. The plan was dangerous. Abigail, feigning a desperate escape, would flee the ranch and make her way to the small neutral settlement of Three Forks, halfway between the ranch and Redemption Bluff. She would carry a valise supposedly containing the ledger. Vane would leak a rumor through a trusted merchant that she was running hoping to sell the ledger to the railroad company, Sloane's biggest competitor. "He'll come for it," Silas said, his voice certain. "He won't send his men. He won't trust Finch. He'll come himself to get that book. And when he does, he'll be in the open, far from his den." "And what about me?" Abigail asked, her voice small. "I will be there," he said. It was a simple statement, delivered with the finality of an oath. "He will not touch you." The night before the plan was to be set in motion, a storm rolled in, trapping them in the house. The wind howled, rattling the thick glass windows. The atmosphere was charged electric. Abigail found she couldn't sleep. She went to the library, lighting a single lamp. She found Silas Vane there, standing before the cold fireplace, staring into the empty hearth. He was holding the silver owl pendant in his hand, not her copy, but another identical one. He heard her enter and looked up, his face shadowed. He seemed surprised, as if he'd been caught in a private moment. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. He nodded, turning the pendant over in his fingers. "You have one too," she observed, touching the one at her own throat. "This was the original," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Yours is a copy I had made years ago. I kept this one." "Why an owl?" she asked, daring to step closer. He was quiet for a long time. The wind and rain seemed to be the only sounds in the world. "My wife Amelia," he said, the name sounding foreign, like a word he hadn't spoken in a decade. "She was from back east, Philadelphia like you. She loved books. She loved the night. She said owls were wise, that they saw the truth in the dark. When we were first married before, I had anything. I saved for 6 months to have this made for her by a silversmith in Santa Fe." He looked at Abigail, and for the first time his eyes were not cold. They were hollowed out by a grief so profound, it was terrifying. "Sloane didn't just take my land. We were partners once. A long time ago, before he was a banker and I was a ghost. We had a silver claim. It was rich. We were going to be kings." He ran his thumb over the pendant. "Amelia. She hated Sloane. She said he was a man with a rot in his soul. She begged me to dissolve the partnership. I was arrogant. I was greedy. I didn't listen." "What happened?" Abigail whispered. "Sloane wanted the whole claim. He saw Amelia as an influence that was weakening me. He arranged an accident, a cave-in at the mine. But it wasn't for me. It was for her. She had come to bring me lunch." His voice broke just for a second, a hairline fracture in a marble facade. "I was at the other end of the tunnel. I heard the dynamite. I heard her scream. I dug her out with my bare hands. She was alive for an hour. She died in my arms, right there in the dust. She was holding this." Abigail's hand flew to her mouth. "Sloane's men said it was a tragic error. Old timbers. Bad luck. But I knew. I knew he had done it. I confronted him. He laughed at me. He had his men beat me and dump me in the desert to die. That, Silas said, is when Elias Thorne found me." Abigail finally understood. The debt. The real debt. Elias was the town doctor in that mining settlement. He found me half dead from thirst and my injuries. He took me in. He hid me from Sloane's men who were hunting me. He stitched me up. He saved my life while I was raving, crying her name. So the debt was for my life. But the war is for Amelia. I used the last of my savings, the money I'd hidden from Sloane, and I disappeared. I spent 10 years building this place, building my wealth, building an army, all for one purpose, to wait for the day I was strong enough to destroy Bartholomew Sloane. He looked at her, his expression raw. When Thorne's box arrived, I saw it. The perfect poetic justice. Sloane killed my wife. He framed an innocent woman for a murder he committed. He used the law to kill her just as he used dynamite to kill Amelia. But this time, I could stop it. You saved me. For her, Abigail realized. I saved you. He corrected his voice, firming the mask, slipping back into place, because you are the living proof of his evil. He tried to kill you, and you survived. Just as I did. He doesn't know what we are. We are the ghosts, and we are going to tear his entire world down. He held out the original pendant. Amelia's. Abigail gently took it. It felt different from hers. It felt alive. Wear this one tomorrow, he said. It saw the truth in the dark once. It's time it saw the light. She unhooked the copy from around her neck and fastened the original. The silver was heavy, weighted with history and blood. By dawn I wore your pendant as a prisoner, she said, her voice shaking, but finding a new hard strength. Tomorrow I'll wear hers as a weapon. Silas Vane looked at her, and for the first time he truly saw her. Not as a pawn, not as a debt, but as an ally. Get some rest, Miss Hayes. Tomorrow we hunt. Dawn broke clear and cold after the storm. The plan was in motion. Silas Vane and 3 of his best men, including his taciturn foreman Caleb, had ridden out hours before taking a high canyon route to reach Three Forks first. Abigail was given a sturdy mare and a small valise. Inside, padded with old clothes, was the ledger. Matilda, the stoic housekeeper, had packed her food and a canteen. As Abigail mounted, Matilda looked at her, her face as impassive as ever. He is putting a great deal of trust in you, girl, she said. He is putting a great deal of trust in his revenge, Abigail replied. It's the same thing. Matilda nodded once. Ride hard, and do not for any reason lose that pendant. Abigail rode. She followed the low, winding creek bed, a route Vane had mapped for her. It was the escape route, the one most visible to any prying eyes. She felt naked, exposed her heart, a frantic drum against her ribs. She was wearing Amelia's pendant. The weight of it was both a comfort and a terrifying responsibility. She rode for 3 hours. The canyon walls gave way to open plains. Three Forks was nothing more than a trading post, a saloon, and a livery stable at a dusty crossroads. It was neutral ground, run by a man named Peterson, who cared only for coin, not politics. As she approached, she saw the rumor Vane had planted had already taken root. A man who matched the description of the merchant Vane had paid was riding hard toward Redemption Bluff. He had seen her. The bait was set. She dismounted at the trading post, her legs shaky. She tied her horse and took the valise. As instructed, she went inside, bought a small bag of grain she didn't need, and made a show of asking Peterson about the stagecoach to Cheyenne. Stage ain't through till Friday, Peterson said, eyeing the valise. I need to get out of this territory, Abigail said, projecting a nervous energy. I have business with the Union Pacific. It was the signal. The business was the ledger. She went into the saloon, a place she would never normally enter, and sat at a small table in the back, ordering a sarsaparilla. She put the valise on the chair beside her, and she waited. The wait was agonizing. An hour passed, then 2. The saloon filled with the midday crowd, drifters, cowboys, and freight drivers. Every time the door swung open, her heart seized. Then he came. Bartholomew Sloane didn't enter with guns blazing. He walked in alone, dressed in his fine suit, looking like a businessman checking on an asset. But his eyes, when they found hers, were devoid of all civility. They were the eyes of a snake. He sauntered to her table, tipping his hat. Miss Hayes. What a surprise. I heard you'd found employment with Mr. Vane. It seems you've resigned. Mr. Sloane, she said, her voice admirably steady. It's a dangerous world for a woman alone, especially one in your unique legal position." He smiled. That was a clever trick Vane pulled. "But a reprieve is not a pardon. You're still a wanted murderer." "I have this," she said, her hand resting on the valise. "Elias Thorne's ledger. I believe the Union Pacific will pay handsomely for proof that you've been diverting their water rights." Sloane's smile tightened. He had taken the bait. "Is that so? You, a simple bookkeeper, think you can play with men like me. I think Elias taught me well. I'm selling it. Then I'm disappearing." Sloane sat down opposite her, his bulk crowding the small table. "A foolish plan. The railroad will cheat you. I, on the other hand, I am a reasonable man. That book is a simple misunderstanding. It belongs to me. It's a partnership asset." "It's a confession," Abigail countered. He leaned in his voice, dropping to a silken threat. "Give me the book, Abigail. Give it to me, and I will personally arrange for a full pardon. I'll give you $500. You can go anywhere, start fresh. And if I don't," his eyes flicked to the bat-wing doors, then back to her, "then you will not live to see the stagecoach on Friday. I'm not giving it to you." Sloane sighed a theatrical gesture. "I had hoped you'd be reasonable." He raised his hand, signaling. Two men who had been pretending to play poker at the bar stood up. They were not ranch hands. They were hired guns. They moved to flank the table. Abigail's heart hammered. Where was Silas, the valise? "Now," Sloane ordered. Abigail clutched it. "No." One of the gunmen reached for it. "Let it go, ma'am," I said, a new voice cut through the saloon. "She's not giving it to you." Silas Vane stood in the doorway, backlit by the harsh afternoon sun. He wasn't alone. Caleb and his other two men fanned out their rifles already leveled. Sloane's face went white, then flooded with purple rage. "Vane, this is not your affair. You're on my land, Bart," Vane said, taking a slow step into the room. Three Forks was not his land, but the declaration was one of power, not geography. "And you are threatening someone under my protection. That makes it my affair." Sloane's men tensed their hands, hovering over their holsters. "You've been a thorn in my side for 10 years, Vane, hiding in your canyon like a coward. All over a dead wife," Sloane spat. "Say her name again," Silas said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "And I'll kill you before you can draw. You think I'm afraid of you?" "You're one man. I own this territory," Sloane shouted. "You own a bank, Bart. That's just paper. This," Silas said, patting the grip of his Colt, "is steel. This is my witness." Sloane roared, losing control. He grabbed Abigail, yanking her from the chair and pulling her against him as a shield. He put a pistol to her head. "The book, Vane. Or she dies for real this time," Abigail cried out, clawing at his arm. "Let her go, Sloane." Vane said, his voice unchanged, his gun still at his side. "The book. Then I'll let her go." Sloane was sweating, his arrogance cracking, revealing the panicked bully beneath. "No," Vane said. Sloane's eyes widened. "What he said?" "No," Abigail gasped. She looked down. Sloane was holding her arm, but his body was pressed against hers. His other hand held the pistol. And around her neck. Sloane's eyes suddenly looked down, confused. He saw the silver owl on her chest. He recognized it. That's Amelia's." He whispered, his mind connecting the final piece. The realization, the sheer poetic insult of it, stunned him. It was the only opening Silas needed. He didn't draw on Sloane. He drew on the man to Sloane's left. The gunshot was deafening in the small room. The gunman crumpled. The second gunman, startled, went for his gun. Caleb and the other man fired. The second gunman fell. It took less than 2 seconds. In that same instant of distraction, as Sloane flinched from the gunshots, Abigail moved. She stomped her heel down hard on Sloane's instep. He roared in pain, his grip loosening. She shoved the valise into his face and dropped to the floor. "Silas!" She screamed. Sloane Blind fired his pistol wildly into the ceiling. Silas Vane was already moving. He strode forward, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't shoot. He hit Sloane with a right cross that sounded like an axe splitting wood. The larger man stumbled back, crashing over the table. Sloane, blood pouring from his nose, raised his pistol. Bang! Vane's Colt fired. The bullet took Sloane square in the chest. Sloane looked down, stunned. He looked at Vane. You can't—" "This is for Amelia," Silas said, his voice cold as the grave. Sloane fell to the floor dead. The saloon was dead silent, filled with blue smoke. Abigail was on the floor, breathing hard, clutching the valise. Vane walked over and calmly holstered his weapon. He looked down at the body of his nemesis, the man who had haunted him for a decade. His face was blank. The war was over. He reached down and offered his hand to Abigail. She took it. He pulled her to her feet. They stood there for a moment, the living and the dead, the smoke clearing around them. "It's done," she whispered. "It's done," he confirmed. He took the valise from her, opened it, and checked the ledger. It was safe. Sheriff Brody burst through the doors, his gun drawn. He'd clearly ridden hard from Redemption Bluff, probably tipped off by the same merchant. He took in the scene: Sloane dead, 2 other bodies, Vane standing calmly, and Abigail Hayes, the hanged woman, holding a smoking gun Vane had just handed her. No, Vane still held his own gun. Abigail was unarmed. Brody looked at the bodies, then at Vane. "Silas. What in God's name happened here?" Silas Vane tossed the ledger onto the bar. "That sheriff is what happened. Read it. It's the last will and testament of Elias Thorne and the confession of Bartholomew Sloane." The aftermath was a quiet storm. Sheriff Brody, holding Thorne's ledger, had all the proof he needed. Back in Redemption, Bluff Deputy Finch, hearing Sloane was dead, crumbled and confessed to planting the gun and lying on the stand. Bartholomew Sloane, once the town's pillar, was now known as a murderer. Abigail Hayes was officially exonerated, her name cleared by the governor. 2 days later, she stood on the porch of Vane's Overlook, packed and free, but with no destination. She wore Amelia's pendant. Silas joined her, gazing at the canyon that had been his fortress. His decade-long war was over, leaving a profound void. "Where will you go?" he asked. Abigail admitted she didn't know. She unfastened the silver owl, holding it out. "This belongs to you." To her. Silas gently closed her fingers over it. "She's at peace," he said, his voice rough. "For 10 years I've been haunted. That pendant was a reminder of death. But you wore it, and you lived. You gave it new meaning. It's a symbol of survival. It's yours if you'll have it." She looped it back around her neck. "On one condition," she said, a new purpose in her eyes. "Elias Thorne's ranch is empty. His dream died with him. I know his business. The ledger taught me everything." Silas, a man suddenly without a purpose, understood. "I have the money," he replied. "And you have the knowledge." He offered his arm. "Let's not keep the territory waiting, Miss Hayes. We have a ranch to buy." Abigail took his arm. They walked into the sunlight, no longer captor and prisoner, but partners. The pendant on her throat was not a collar or a memorial. It was a promise. And that's the story of how a gallows rope became a lifeline. Abigail and Silas, bound not by love, but by the shared ghosts of their past, stepped out of the shadow of revenge and into the sunlight of a new future. They didn't just rebuild Elias Thorne's ranch. They rebuilt their lives, transforming a symbol of loss into one of resilience. The West was full of stories of revenge, but the rarest and most real stories are those of redemption. If you were on the edge of your seat watching Abigail's fate unfold, please show your support by hitting that like button. It truly helps our channel grow. What did you think of Silas Vane's motives? Was it justice or just revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more dramatic stories of the Wild West, more tales of karmic justice, and unexpected twists, make sure you hit subscribe and ring that bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next.